My response, our Colorado's response, is driven by data, not by politics on any side, not by wishful thinking, certainly not by pseudoscience, but by cold hard data. And as you can see, the data is beginning to be alarming. We had very encouraging data from June. Coloradans were sustaining it, but there has been some change in the behavior of Coloradans that we need to go back to how we were living in early June and make sure that we are more cautious. We need to make sure that we can continue to maintain the necessary social distancing to avoid the virus exponentially taking off in Colorado. And that's what we're starting to see now. We can still act. There is a small window of opportunity because if we don't act at the current rate that we saw, if you extrapolate that out, the state would exceed its ICU capacity in September. So that's the bad news. The good news is there is time. There's time to act right now, next few days. I hope it started already from the warnings of the last week. We are really on the knife's edge. Many nearby states have shown us what will happen. It's not what may happen, it's what will happen if we don't regain our footing and take social distancing and masks seriously. So for starters, I'm hoping that the people of Colorado, that this is a wake-up call for those who might have become a little bit lax. We need to take this very seriously. Our lives depend on it, and our economy depends on it. And, you know, you're probably observing this anecdotally. You might be noticing that there's more interactions and people are a little less cautious than they were in May and June. Certainly the 4th of July weekend didn't help too. We see the effect of out-of-state visitors. We need to live here in Colorado in a sustainable way like we did in May and early June. We can't have this backslide to the way that we have all been acting these last few weeks. To the extent that there's been a party the last week or two, the party has to end. If we're going to keep our businesses open, keep our economy open, and save lives. You know, at this point, of course, we are also focused on what steps we as a state can take to keep our economy open and save lives. Now, keep in mind the biggest factor is your behavior, reducing your social interactions, wearing masks, washing your hands regularly. That's the most important. But as policymakers, as mayors, as governors, as commissioners across our state, we always ask ourselves, what is the right thing to do from a policy perspective to make sure that we can keep our economy open and save lives? So first, a thing we're going to be announcing today is I'm putting a 2-week pause on issuing new variances to counties in the state of Colorado. That's the prudent thing to do at this moment in time. As we look at the changes that are made and the more responsible behavior that people enter into and the increased mask wearing, and hope that the trajectory changes so that additional variances can be granted. We also know that there are some areas that have variances that have increased virus. They have to have mitigation plans or they could lose their variances. That doesn't change today. That's always been the process. But the key point is we're taking a 2-week timeout on variances so that we can get control of this. We have to get control of this in our state. We need to prevent this kind of exponential spread. The bottom line is that, like all Coloradans, I want to be able to enjoy life and go to a restaurant and get a haircut and keep our businesses open and protect our economy and protect lives. And the data increasingly shows that one of the powerful tools that we as a state have done well on but can do better on is wearing masks. And that's why today I'm signing an executive order that's effective at midnight tonight that requires that every Coloradan age 10 and up wear a mask or face covering whenever they're in any public indoor space, a store, a business, an office. Of course, anybody with a medical condition or something that might put them at risk is exempt from that requirement. But I would certainly ask that anybody who does have respiratory issues really strongly consider staying at home for this month because they are at the highest risk. If your medical condition is such that you have diminished lung capacity and can't breathe through a mask, 2 things. One is ask your doctor to recommend a different mask because there are masks that you might be able to breathe better through. But if your respiratory capacity is that diminished, this is a time to stay at home. This is like another April for you if you are at such high risk that you have difficulty breathing. And of course, our older Coloradans are also, just by their age, by the way, just so you know, all the data shows. It is age itself that is the risk factor. It's pre-existing conditions at any age make it worse if you're diabetic at age 40 or age 80. But the mere fact of being 76, as my parents are, and my, reasonably healthy for 76, that age, it puts them at risk. My parents are continuing to stay at home, not going out, even having their groceries brought. I'd be willing to let them see the grandkids, but out of precaution, they're not seeing the grandkids other than virtually talking to them every day. And that's a good decision because we do want them here for decades to come. I want them to see our kids grow up, graduate high school, and live their lives. Look, in Colorado, there's no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service. Very simple. And we have over 60 or over 40 counties and municipalities that have already have local mask orders. And for many of you, that's not even a change. This is just clarity. This is just clarity that this is a Colorado value because we value our economy, we value saving lives, and people go between cities and counties, and often you don't even know where the border are. You have that same expectation of safety if you're shopping anywhere in our state. And if you're working in a store or a business or an office anywhere in our state. And of course, there's exceptions. You can look at all the details. Of course, in a restaurant, it's the same. You walk in with a mask, but when you sit down, you're at the table. Obviously, you're not wearing a mask. When you're exercising alone, you don't need to wear a mask. All the normal things. When you're getting a personal service like a beard trim or a facial, you're not wearing a mask. The person doing it is. All the practical, normal stuff. I mean, this is designed to work in the real world. So don't worry about that. But I want to thank our local leaders for leading the way, including these two gentlemen who've joined me today. Across our state, over 40 counties and municipalities have shown that this is a responsible, bipartisan, common sense step to take as a mask wearing culture. We have talked a number of times about how you shouldn't wait for a requirement. It's a rational thing to do to save your life and protect our economy, protect your loved ones. It turns out that having this kind of ordinance in place does increase mask wearing fairly substantially. Go back to the last slide, please. There's two different surveys that were done by outside groups, one CDPHE, one outside group. Mask wearing in counties with no mask order, 67%. Pretty good. Colorado is pretty good. That's one of the reasons we're not a hot spot. We're doing pretty good on mask wearing. But with the mask ordinance, it went to 83%. The other study showed 49% going to 57%. Now, the other piece of information I want to know is, okay, I want to make sure mask wearing ordinances don't make people think everything's safe and they can forget about social distancing. That's very, very important. Wearing a mask complements social distancing. So we wanted to look at, are people focused on maintaining 6-foot distance more, the same, or less with a mask wearing ordinance? And it's a small difference, but the key thing for me is it wasn't less. I wanted to make sure that if the places with mask wearing ordinances, people weren't all congregating together just because they thought it was safe with the mask wearing ordinance. The good news is if there's any difference, people are more careful about 6-foot distances very slightly in the areas with mask wearing ordinances. So this data from these two different data points was key to me in deciding yes, local requirements and county requirements can increase mask wearing. And no, it does not make people think that they can forget about social distancing. That's very important in coming to this decision. Next slide. This is even more important data. It's hard to get your arms around, but what this basically shows is that the areas of our state that have had mask wearing requirements have had slower spread of the virus. The virus has spread less in areas that have had mask wearing orders by a statistically significant amount, and that is incredibly important data point for me in making this statewide. What this also shows is even the areas with mask wearing requirements have still been increasing. So we still need to focus on that social distancing, but they've been increasing at a lower rate than the cities and counties that don't have it. Somebody mentioned repeat the details of the mask order. It's really simple. Wear a mask. I mean, you can get into the details. Basically, it's a practical way to say wear a mask. I mean, obviously, no one says wear a mask when you're eating or when you're working out by yourself. But you don't have to worry about the details. You just have to know you should wear a mask when you're in public. You're going to a store, you're going to the office, you're going to a place where others congregate. You need to wear a mask. It's practical. Obviously, where you can't wear a mask, you're not going to wear a mask, and nobody would ask you to. But anywhere where you're with others, public congregation, you need to do it. It's super important. Look, we have a choice in Colorado: either more mask wearing and more attention to social distancing, or more damage to our economy and loss of life. I mean, that's an easy decision to make when you put out that that's basically the decision we have. And of course, like anybody who cares about liberty and freedom, I'm resistant to institute a statewide mandate. But it's clear that at this point in time, this is the least bad of the options that we have at our disposal. It will increase mask wearing. It will decrease the spread of the virus. It'll provide clarity across different borders. And it's the right thing to do. And I want to give you an example of how effective masks are. A recent study from Missouri. The CDC published a study where they looked at the activities of 2 hairstylists in Springfield, Missouri, who both worked while they were unknowingly contagious with COVID-19. Both stylists wore masks at the salon where they worked, and 98% of the clients that they served also wore masks. Between the 2 stylists, they saw 139 clients, and despite both stylists being contagious with COVID-19, and despite the close proximity of haircuts, 0 clients contracted COVID-19. That is an example of how we can have a sustainable economy and we can get our hair cut with COVID-19. As I mentioned, given the effectiveness of masks, we also will be helping school districts have the personal protective equipment that they need to be able to protect their staff. We will be able to get them medical grade masks. We're going to send them to the school district building, 1 per teacher per week, and then that will complement their efforts to have personal protective equipment for their staff and increase protections for teachers and students for school districts, regardless of what the environment looks like in the area and what format the year has. Finally, before I introduce Mayor Hancock, I just want to make one final point. You know, wearing a mask is not a political statement. I don't know how in anybody's mind this became a game of political football. It's simple, it's common sense, and it's data. The virus doesn't care what political party you're in. The virus doesn't care what belief system you have. The virus doesn't care what your ideology is. The virus is the virus. And it is a threat to every single one of us. And I completely understand and sympathize with concerns of businesses and workers and the desire to stay safe. And this will help do that. It'll help people who work, for instance, in retail and public-facing environments who have been wearing masks as a requirement since they've been able to reopen. But this will provide additional protection for them, knowing that their customers, maybe 65% were wearing masks before, now everyone will be wearing a mask, and it'll help save the lives of many of our retail workers as well. You know, if you drive a car, you wear a seatbelt, you obey the speed limit, you drive sober. Doesn't matter whether you agree politically with speed limits or with drunk driving laws, but we follow the law. If you have a political axe to grind, you do that through your elected representatives. But we have responsibilities as Coloradans and as Americans to follow the law. And the mask order is the law of Colorado. As I said throughout this crisis, we're going to monitor the data very closely. We're going to take appropriate actions as we need to protect our health care, our capacity, lives, the economy, and do what we can to make sure that Colorado can remain a positive outlier with regard to a nation that is having large problems in tackling this virus in a cohesive way. With that, let me turn it over to Denver Mayor Mike Hancock. He's been a very important partner. Mayor Hancock.
Thank you. A tremendous tool for all of Colorado as we begin to continue our efforts to really get ahead of this spike. You know, when we instituted mandatory face coverings in Denver more than about 2 months ago, it was a decision based on science, as you just alluded to. Denver's health order was part of a bigger strategy to blunt the curve and the spread of the pandemic. Following the governor's guidance, staying at home, leaving only if essential for essential reasons, physically distancing 6 feet or more, not gathering in groups. These are strategies that kept Denver and Colorado ahead of the curve, and we intend to stay there. And that's why we're here today and why the governor has made this very wise move. You know, since we instituted the order, we've heard from businesses who've asked for support and signage, and we've supported that. But we've also heard from residents who report when they see a violation or someone not wearing a mask in public. And so this statewide order is a powerful, powerful tool for all of us across the state. Let me just give you one example. I shared this with the governor and Mayor Kaufman earlier. Denver is one of the top 3 cities in terms of our airports seeing passengers come through our airports. Well, we know during this pandemic that people are either seeking beaches or mountains. And with the beaches really being places where there are hotspots, they are coming to our mountains. Well, if you're up in a resort in our mountains, while the staff might be wearing masks, the only tool they have is to ask for compliance for people to wear a mask, to volunteer to wear a mask and comply with that request. Well, this state order now gives them the tool to say no one has a choice anymore. We all must wear masks to protect each other. So what we're going to be doing over the coming days in Denver is we'll continue to follow up on every one of the complaints and concerns that we hear from people with warnings and citations and appeals like this, asking our neighbors to do the right thing, to comply, and to mask up. We called our regional partners and we're grateful. Last week, several mayors joined together and wrote a letter and asked for our regional partners to mask up as well. And we want to thank Tri-County Health as well as Jefferson County for stepping up to the plate. This is how we find balance and learn to live in a COVID reality, tempering our progress when the data shows we need to slow down and do the right thing. That means taking action like this when we see 80 new cases a day and not waiting for those numbers to jump to 2,000 as we've seen in other cities like Miami to react. We've seen a growing number in cities across the country. I commiserate with my friends and counterparts all over this country who are having to roll back their openings because they understand just as we do how devastating having to shut this economy down would be to our businesses and to employees. So with the leadership of Governor Polis and partners like Mayor Kaufman, we are showing the nation how Colorado leads by prioritizing the health and safety of residents and the businesses that support our community. So we recognize that we cannot do this alone. None of us can do this alone. And so through this order, we get the opportunity to all work together to keep each other safe. And Governor, again, I want to thank you for this because this, again, gives a very powerful tool to all of our businesses and workers throughout Colorado.
Thank you. And we have
The statewide face mask mandate because I believe that it is the best and that it is the least invasive and least costly public health option that is available to us to stem the spread of the COVID-19 virus. The alternatives are to shut down businesses and to force our schools to remain closed if no preventative actions are taken and the COVID numbers increase to the point where further restrictions are required. Yesterday, I got a call from the Cherry Creek School superintendent yesterday morning, Dr. Scott Siegfried, and he talked to me about a mask mandate, and this is what he said. He said, when you consider the simple steps we can take to mitigate the spread of the virus, such as wearing a mask, I have one simple question. Why wouldn't we do everything possible to help ensure that students can have school this year? As a community, I hope we do the right thing to protect teachers, staff, students, and their education. And let me just say, I know there's going to be some grumbling about this. I get that. It's a mandate from government. But, you know, and yes, I get that some people are going to say this is a hardship. But let me tell you this, I meet with small businesses every day that haven't been able to open up, and then that if things get worse, will have their businesses shuttered again. That's a hardship. Children not being able to go to school, that's a hardship. So that, I mean, I think we need to put it in context. that this is really, again, the least invasive approach that we can do at this time as a preventative strategy. We have got to get children back to school. We have got to open up this economy. And that's what I fear most, is the inability to do that. And that's why I'm here today supporting the governor. Let me tell you this, before I wasn't on board, when the numbers were going in the right direction, and the current strategy was just working. Hospitalizations moving down. Yes, there were more positives, but we were doing more testing. But now it's different, and now I'm worried. A lot of people are hurting because of the restrictions that have been imposed for the time that they were imposed, and some of them are still on us. And we do a food drive once a week in Aurora, food distribution drive, and we help about 500 families. And that's really the depth of the suffering that has happened. So if people think wearing a mask is a hardship, they need to think about the others in our society that have been suffering, and that would suffer more if we have to reenact even more of these restrictions and not go forward and open up this economy. So I want to thank the governor for doing this, and quite frankly, the governor and I have had calls over the last couple of weeks. Well, I've asked the governor for this. Tri-County Health just passed a mandate for the 3 counties that the city of Aurora is in: Douglas County, Arapahoe County, and Adams County. But it was done with an opt-out clause. And so it's going to create a patchwork within the Denver metro area. And the fact is that the majority of the workforce in Aurora, the 54th largest city in America, 3rd largest city in Colorado, 382,000 in population. The majority of the workforce leaves Aurora during the morning, comes back in the late afternoon. And so the notion that we can have this patchwork and it would be effective is just not possible. And that's why over the last 2 weeks, I asked the governor for action. And he never shared with me where he was on it. But thank you for listening, Governor, and thank you for your action today in putting Colorado on the right track.
And yeah, you shouldn't have to like look at a map and see what jurisdiction you're in to know if you're going to be safe when you're going to the store. Workers in stores, customers, and businesses deserve to be as safe as reasonably possible about every Coloradan, and we're all interconnected. You might live in Aurora and work in Denver and visit your kids in Thornton. I mean, they're all, we're really interconnected, and it's really important we approach public health and keeping our economy open in an interconnected way. Thank you to both mayors. As you can see, this is our economic opening. I want to reiterate, a big part of getting it right as numbers rise is also protecting those who are most at risk. And if you have pre-existing conditions, if you're an older Coloradan, stay home as much as possible. If we want to help get our state through this crisis, in addition to wearing masks, reach out to an elder offer to bring groceries to their home, ask if you can be of help so that they don't have to go out. Be a good friend. Be a part of every community's support system. We need compassion now more than ever, and we need those everyday heroes, including you, to step up again and again for neighbors in need. That begins by wearing a mask, but it doesn't end by wearing a mask. This will continue to be a difficult time that demands a lot of us. We wish that wearing masks was a silver bullet and solved everything. It doesn't. We have to keep up the social distancing, not have large groups, avoid interactions, really focus on staying safe. Masks are an important part of that. They complement that, but we need to do better in other areas too. And it'll likely continue to be difficult for the next few weeks and months. Now, this is the situation we are in, not the situation that we want to be in or that we wish upon it ourselves, but we must take it seriously or it will deteriorate as it has in other states. As it's written in Proverbs 23:18, for there will be a future and your hope should never fail. And look, we have a bright future in Colorado. We're going to get through this. There will be a vaccine or cure. But in the meantime, we have to live in a way that's sustainable from a social perspective, a health perspective, a psychological perspective, an economic perspective, and we are not currently living that way. We were living that way late May, early June. We need to live like that. Masks and increased usage give us a little more freedom, but we cannot take this virus for granted. The minute we do, it will overtake us as it has overtaken our brothers and sisters in other parts of the country. We're going to get through this, but we need to step up our game, and we need to take this more seriously than we ever have. With that, we're happy to take some questions.
Governor, a week ago we sat here and you said that a mask mandate.
The two areas that convinced me that this would work is looking at the impact that mask ordinance have had, increasing mask wearing 15%, over areas that have not had those ordinances. It's not so much because of the enforcement of those ordinances. They're not widely enforced, but the mere clarity of message of those ordinances in the areas that have them have successfully increased mask wearing by 15% and also led to a reduction in the spread of the virus. The state has a few ways to work with local law enforcement around enforcement. This creates a nexus to violating state laws around trespassing, which if somebody were to run into a store naked or without a mask, they are trespassing. And this gives that store the ability to call local law enforcement to enforce trespassing charge to make sure that they can keep their customers and their workers safe. And in addition, we also can make sure that businesses are following this protocol by making sure that they have that their licenses are always have to follow the health requirements. That's what restaurants and bars, not every business, but they're businesses that have to follow licensing requirements will have to follow these. So like in any law, of course, we require local buy-in and local enforcement. But the very existence of this kind of order alone from this data that's been provided me in the last few days, I'm confident will increase mask wearing in Colorado.
Hi, Governor. This is Spencer Wilson with KKTV 11 News. I was going to check and see, what would you say to those communities like Colorado Springs that have been resistant to putting in place their own mandate, or their citizens who have been actively protesting any mask mandate?
Well, I think this can certainly, which are generally sporadically enforced or seldom enforced, the mere existence of those local ordinances increase mask wearing by 15% in the areas of our state that have them. I am confident that a statewide requirement will also increase mask wearing in our state, and there's really no excuse not to take action. That's new information. That's based on those two studies that I indicated, and that was presented to me in the last couple of days. The second piece is the deterioration of the state, the virus, which is expanding. Hospitalizations are up, case counts are up. As Mayor Kaufman said, this is the least costly and simplest intervention that we can do. It would be inexcusable in my mind to even be talking about closing down businesses or limiting commerce if you haven't even instituted a mask wearing requirement for Coloradans. And we're hoping that along with Colorado's attentiveness and taking this seriously around social distancing, coupled with mask wearing, will alter the trajectory in a way that we can avoid becoming a hot spot. Talking about today, I think there's not a resident of Colorado and there's not an elected official in Colorado that doesn't want to do everything they can to avoid having to ever stay at home again for a long period of time. The way that we achieve that is mask wearing, avoiding social interactions wherever possible, staying 6 feet from others, washing your hands regularly, limiting your contacts. That's the way that we do that. Be smart, be clean, be careful. That's how we get that done. Mayor Hancock?
It's the overriding message here. We will do everything we can to try to avoid having to issue stay-at-home orders. That's not where we want to go. And it's the reason why we're all taking these very proactive steps to mitigate the spike that we are seeing in our state, but we're seeing it also around the country. We've got plenty of examples of why we want to take these steps today. And so I absolutely agree with you. We want to avoid going to that. But let me just say that we look at a body of data. that help us to make some very good decisions. This is data-driven, science-driven, medically advised-driven from professionals, and so we are listening. And when we see a combination of a lot of these matrices that we monitor, I will just say that it would have to get tragically bad for us to have to reinstitute stay-at-home orders. And what that means is that we have quite a few metrics that are driving to a spike that we cannot control. Our hospitals are at very serious risk of being overrun, for example, along with the number of infection cases that are growing as well. So let's not really spend a lot of time talking about that, because our hope is that we never have to go back there. But understand that we are monitoring many matrices that will give us guidance on what decisions we have to make.
Mayor Coffin?
This is Joe Vacquet with Denver 7. I know when the red flag law took effect, you had sheriffs that came out and said they would not enforce that. How would you handle it in this case if anyone in law enforcement or sheriff said they wouldn't respond to a call about somebody not wearing a mask?
Well, that's where I think this also answers, do you get at enforcement? I think that every sheriff takes a matter of illegal trespassing seriously. If somebody is on private property, the owner of the property says, you need to leave, you're violating our terms of service, maybe you're naked, maybe you're not wearing a mask, maybe you're screaming and yelling, maybe you're yelling, fire, fire, and there's not a fire. All law enforcement is very responsive to those types of trespassing complaints that are lodged by private establishments. So I feel that that is a effective way that we can work with local law enforcement, sheriffs, and police chiefs to make sure that people are able to protect their businesses. Mayor Coffin, the question asked about sheriffs. It's municipal codes, county codes, and state licenses. So there's a whole constellation of ways that that people can have a reasonable expectation of safety.